Hello friends, welcome to this episode in our Leadership Clarity series. And my name, Dr. Yuri Vermeulen. In this episode, we are going to look how Paul responded in a disrupting world. Something, of course, very relevant to us today in the 21st century, where we have this pandemic around the world, causing so much havoc and forcing us to adjust to so many new things, remote working and wearing of masks and social distancing and all sorts of new technological things that we need to try to just cope in our lives and in our work environments. Fortunately for us, there's a very lovely example of how Paul responded to a disrupting world in Acts chapter 27 and 8, where Paul's journey to Rome is described in some detail. In this dramatic event that we read about here, Paul displays at least three main skills that we need, that leaders need in times of disruption in the world. The first thing that we read of, that we can see in Acts chapter 27, is the fact that Paul maintained contextual awareness throughout. We read in verse 1 to 8 that they were on their way, they were on the boat, and first to start out with, they had good winds helping them along, and they came to fair havens. But then the story takes a nasty turn, and Luke writes, he says, much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. And since the harbor, Fair Havens, was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete. So we see here this principle of maintaining contextual awareness that Paul displays. He was more attuned to his environment than even the ship's captain, the pilot, the owner, and the centurion. So he's warning them in no uncertain terms that this is going to bring disaster. He can see that already. He can see the end of this path, and he wants them to rather stay where they are and not suffer the loss and the tragedy of shipwreck and all that. The next skill that we see Paul displayed was that he maintained strategic clarity, hope, and determination. Strategic clarity, hope, and determination in this disruption that took place. So Luke writes, and he says in verse 20, Acts chapter 27, when neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, remember he says we finally gave up all hope of being saved. So it's not just the other people that gave up all hope. It seems like even Luke and those with him gave up all hope. I'm not sure if Paul gave up hope. It's not clear from this passage, but it seems like Luke, in his heart of hearts, gave up all hope of being saved. Yet in the midst of this misery, something incredible happens. On the 14th day, God's angel appears to Paul in the middle of the night, in the midst of this chaos. And he says in verse 21, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice. I told you so. And not sail from Crete, then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of God, whom I belong to and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men. For I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Nothing trumps having real contact with God, especially in a disrupting world. One message from God transformed fear into faith, darkness into light, despair into hope, and weakness into strength. Only one word from God. And God had to remind Paul quite forcibly, sending an angel to remind him of the fact that he had to stand before Caesar. That was the plan, and no storm, however deadly, is going to come in the way of Paul standing before Caesar. And so Paul's special calling and this purpose that God had for him was the catalyst for salvation in this situation. So Paul did what good leaders do. They received revelation, they received clarity. So Paul lived in the circle of clarity from that point on, and that's what leaders do. They live in the circle of clarity. Because he was in that circle of clarity, seeing everything clearly, he was able to say in verse 25, "Take courage, men, for I trust in God that it will be just as I was told, but we have to run aground." So hope is a leader's currency. That's what we work with. And on that morning, Paul expertly did what effective leaders do. He created new hope, suddenly built resilience, explaining the world to that group of wet, scared, pathetic people. He gave them hope. He explained the world to them, their world on that little wooden boat. This is what's happening. This is what's going to happen. Take courage. Let's get to work. And so he created clarity from chaos and sense out of nonsense. And it's important to understand that this is what leaders do. The third and last principle that we see displayed by Paul was he maintained operational agility. It says in Acts chapter 27, verse 27, it was the 14th night. They were driven along the Mediterranean by the storm. And about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were getting close to land, so they dropped a line with a weight, found the water was so deep, and later on they do the same, and they saw that it was getting shallower and shallower. And knowing that the ship will run aground, they made plans, they lowered anchors, they made preparations for landing. So in verse 40, cutting loose anchors and so on, they beached. And we know that they used parts of the ship to survive the shipwreck, and they all were on the beach by morning. We see clearly here how they maintained operational agility. They combined this clarity with meaningful action. And that's what we need to do as leaders. We need to maintain our clarity so that we can take meaningful action that will really make a difference. So we have to develop a strategic agility or an emergent strategic mindset, which enables us to react in real time, respond in real time to emerging forces in our environment. So they were wet, they were on the beach, they built a fire, and even then Paul was attacked by the snake, and the locals knew this was a deadly snake because they were waiting for Paul to just keel over and die. And then when nothing happened, they decided he's not cursed after all. He might be a god. But Paul takes everything in his stride. He just goes on ministering like nothing happens within all this disruption around him. There's sickness on the island, and Paul has an impromptu healing crusade and has a great ministry on that island and establishes a church there. So this operational agility, just adapting to whatever happens, combined with meaningful action, is absolutely critical. And so upon arrival in Rome, Paul just continues to minister, and he just switches gears effortlessly. This, of course, these three principles that we looked at is something that we should emulate as leaders: maintaining contextual awareness, maintaining strategic clarity, hope and determination, and operational agility combined with meaningful action is absolutely critical, and it will make, just like in the life of Paul, make a huge difference to our survival, and not only our survival, but that we might be able to thrive even in the midst of tragedy and disruption. I trust this was informative and that it blessed you, and feel free to add your comments in the box below. I would like to hear some of your experiences, and maybe you have some more principles that can help us in this disrupting world of ours. Thank you. Bye-bye.